Just want to remind you guys this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Guys, be sure to hop over to prizepicks.com today. And when you do that, use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you pay your first $5 lineup. Well, Colts Nation, we are just a little over a quarter way into the season. And here we are already talking about this position group. A position group that, Derek, we clamored all offseason. Not just us, everybody clamored all this offseason. We got to talk today about this GM that we have right now, his arrogance, and how he's already dug his own grave when it comes to this Colts defensive back room. So without further ado, let's get into it. What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another one, guys. And yeah, this is not going to be a super positive episode. Just going to say that right off the bat because, Derek, the Indianapolis Colts have a serious issue when it comes to their cornerback room. I mean, as of right now, Derek, as of, I guess, today, we're going to drop it the day of. The Indianapolis Colts have just released a couple hours ago cornerback Dallas Flowers, who a lot of people, including us, said, hey, could he potentially be that number 2 outside corner? Well, you saw what happened, Derek, with Dallas Flowers on Sunday against really a Jaguars team that wasn't able to pass the football. 2 of the touchdowns that were thrown were against Dallas Flowers. And so he's no longer with the team, Derek. So you kind of sit here right now and you say, man, holy cow, the Indianapolis Colts are decimated at corner. And I can't even use the word decimated because it's just like the Indianapolis Colts just don't have a lot of corners on this football team that can play quality snaps. That's kind of the crazy thing about it. And the crazier thing about it is the Colts had ample opportunities this offseason, Derek, to do something of note at the cornerback position, but they stayed pat. They did nothing at corner. Absolutely nothing. Zero thing of note. And the 2 guys you drafted are no longer on your team. So when it comes, Derek, to this group, I mean, you look at it, and I don't even know what to say, man, because this is a group that has been absolutely shredded the last 3 weeks by quarterbacks, and I will get into it, but not by these elite quarterbacks. So, Derek, we're already through the course of, this season. The Indianapolis Colts have only played, 5 games so far? And already the questions are coming. Why in the world did Chris Ballard completely neglect this position? Why in the world? And it's coming back to bite us already. Now, again, I will say off the top, Derek, injuries are something you can't predict, okay? So if there's any benefit of the doubt to give, it is about the injuries. Like, that is unfortunate. But when you look at it, Derek, when you look at any sort of quality depth, it's non-existent right now with this cornerback room. So I've talked enough. Let me know your thoughts, man, because I know we have a lot here on the cornerback room and just kind of the Colts' reluctance for whatever reason this offseason to address it in any form or fashion.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I was trying to look at my notes and be like, who was on this team going into training camp and who's on it now, right? Like, I don't even recognize half of the group anymore. Mainly because half of it's not even there. I mean, and what's crazy about the Dallas Flowers situation, and I'll kind of give my 2 cents on it because you had a chance to talk about it. I really didn't earlier. Dallas Flowers, I mean, I was the one, Cody, on this group that, and on this show that came out and was like, I have high hopes for Dallas Flowers. I thought when he came back, I thought he had a legit chance to be that outside corner number 2. Even if he wasn't, was going to be a depth piece for you that I thought was going to be a good one. And man, I mean, I definitely was wrong about how good he actually could be. But I will say this, Cody, I am shocked at this move, mainly because I know he hasn't been good, but you were already really thin at the cornerback position, and you still released him. You still waived him, which is crazy to say the least when this group is already dealing with injuries, already dealing with all these different problems, and you're still waving guys out of the group and you're not really replenishing them that much. I know David Long got brought in this last week, but again, David Long, he hasn't played a down for this team yet. I don't know if he's used to this system. I don't know how good he is. But just going into this, so here, you had Daryl Baker Jr., Dallas Flowers, and then the two guys that you drafted, right? Jalen Simpson and Micah Abraham, that were on this team at the start of this season when training camp started. And all of these guys have either been released or waived since roster cuts happened. So your half of your secondary group has been gone from that. And you said, oh, we like our guys. No, you just like the three guys that you have that were starting for you. And unfortunately for you, one of those three guys that you liked, he's out with injury again for a significant portion of the season, for the entire season for this one. Last year, he was out for practically half the year. This year, he's out since week 1. So you don't get any continuity with him. And then the other guy that you have on the outside, Jalen Jones, albeit he hasn't been totally terrible, but it ain't like Jalen Jones has been setting the world on fire either with his play this year. And then Kenny Moore obviously has missed the last 2 games due to his injury. So like there has been this whole thing that Ballard was saying. We wanted to get continuity with this group and we wanted to have this whole group work together. You have one player that has had any chance to get any kind of continuity with anything, and that's Jalen Jones. He's the only one that has had any significant times. And not to mention, like I said, I was talking to you before the show. Colts now only have 4 active corners at the moment, with Kenny Moore also injured. And like I said, one of them hasn't even played for this team. And Chris Lamons is only a nickel guy. What happens if he goes down? Who's playing nickel? Ain't nobody playing nickel after that. And so I'm so frustrated with this because, and I know you're going to obviously say something as well, but like we heard the whole thing, right? About how, oh, we liked our guys. We liked our guys. You really didn't, because you got rid of every depth piece that you ever had on this team when the season started. The season started and you have completely reshuffled your entire depth of your secondary, your entire thing. And then 2 of your guys that are the starters of this defense have not been available for a good chunk of the year. So I mean, what is this? What was this experiment all about if this was going to be the end result here?
Well, Derek, I think you also need to weigh the fact and say, look, like at the end of the day, what did Chris Ballard put his faith in? I mean, let's be honest, Derek. He put his faith when it comes to cornerbacks and 3 unproven guys. Kenny Moore, the only proven guy really in this group, right? And I understand wanting to play young, but you look at it, Derek, the 3 unproven guys. Jalen Jones, a 7th round pick last year. Okay. Like he's been fine. He's been decent. I would say he's been an average to above average corner. All right, that's fine. But then you look at it. You talked about it. Juju Brents, who's now had a second year full of injuries. You have Dallas Flowers, who has that Achilles. Like I would think that you would try to get at least some sort of quality insurance at the cornerback position. Like I'm not talking about bringing in like just another guy to compete. It almost felt like these guys just kind of got handed these spots, which I just think is never a smart move, especially for a group that it's not like you went out there and invested multiple day 1 and day 2 picks into, like it's not like the Colts did that. If they were doing that, you're like, okay, you drafted a corner in round 2, a corner in round 3 or whatever, like they're not doing that. At the end of the day, you're putting your faith in a lot of unprovenness when it comes to this corner position, and you didn't have a backup plan to resort to, and that's kind of the biggest issue for me is you didn't really have that. I really think you got lucky with Samuel Womack because he's played very well football, very good football so far for you. He's played very well, but and when you look at it, Derek, at the end of the day, like you still are lacking quality depth, and even now more so without Dallas Flowers. So, I mean, Derek, when you really look at it, you talked about it. You're talking about two of your top four corners who are no longer on your team that you projected were going to do really good stuff for you. I mean, you had faith that Dallas Flowers was going to be the guy that was going to come back and pick up where he left off, but I just don't think necessarily I think you put too much faith in that. I just think you put too much faith in things that you probably shouldn't have, and you should have at least had some sort of option there in case this does happen. He doesn't look the same because an Achilles injury is significant, Derek. You can't just ignore that. Juju Brents, you can't ignore the fact that he missed a crap ton of time last year, and the fact that he got injured again this year. You can't ignore that. So that's kind of my bigger issue is just like you knew that you were already lacking in the depth department. And obviously the Colts don't know how the heck to evaluate corners because they believed in two guys that are no longer on the roster, which is just crazy to me. Multiple guys, actually. You talked about really, three guys, I suppose, that you've outright got rid of. You talk about Dallas Flowers, you talk about obviously the rookies guys, you talk about Darrell Baker, you talk about all those guys, right? That the Colts were adamant. Like they believe those guys are going to play some good ball for them, and not a single one has, which is just crazy. So that's kind of my bigger thing is just like the fact that you just really don't have another plan in place. And again, injuries are something you can't predict. I will totally agree with that. But you have to have some sort of depth. And I think that's a position, Derek, where I look at it and I say, there's other positions where the Colts invested into actually getting some quality depth and some young guys, right?
Yeah.
The offensive line, for example, we knew Ryan Kelly was probably not going to play in 17 games this year. I mean, history's shown he's going to get injured. It's the same thing probably with Juju Brents or Dallas Flowers coming off the injury. So it was just kind of a weird, neglect of the position when it comes to the depth standpoint. And just okay, if you want to go young, then go young. Bring in some more young DBs. And they just didn't do that. So that's kind of
the ones that they did bring in, they released them. Or they gave them a chance.
Yeah. And also they were day 3 picks too. It's like you didn't really seriously invest in any guy. You didn't
invest a lot of high draft capital into the things anyway. Like, Ballard trying to find that next Isaiah Rodgers. Well, believe me, the next Isaiah Rodgers doesn't always come around. And to be honest with you, Isaiah Rodgers hasn't done anything with the Eagles since being cut by the Indianapolis Colts anyway. Just a reminder for everyone. I know we say, why in the world did Chris Ballard cut him? I mean, guys, it's not like he's lighting the world on fire with the Eagles over there. I mean, he's barely getting any snaps. I don't even think he's really playing at all. So there's that. Well, first things first, let me think of this from a couple different angles here, Cody. So the injuries front. Yes, you as a GM have to have a contingency plan because you have to know that you're most likely going to have injuries on every single unit that you have, which is why you have the depth pieces, so that when your guys miss significant time, you have someone that can come in and take the reins. Like you said, you got really lucky with Samuel Womack. You got very lucky to be able to get a guy like that off waivers and to know he's actually doing really well. But Cody, what did we say throughout the entirety of the year? The safety group and the cornerback group was littered with talent, littered with it. And the Colts were incapable of getting anyone through free agency, any of them. None of them. There's still guys that are sitting on their couches, not doing anything. And yet we still are not making a move on anyone that I guarantee would be better than either Jalen Jones or Samuel Womack in this moment. But the other side of this, so with that argument's done. With the injuries to this team, I know that a lot of people are insinuating that the injuries are the reason why this defense is so bad, right? This is a little bit more of a contingency on the Gus Bradley train. Listen, I totally get it. Like, the amount of injuries you have can impact things. But Cody, what we saw last night with the Dallas Cowboys, Cody, the Dallas Cowboys were down 4 of their defensive linemen. I think it was 3 of their starters, both their defensive ends and their best defensive tackle. And they were missing their best corner. And do you know how many yards they held Justin Fields to for the day? 148 total yards against that Dallas defense that was riddled with injuries, particularly on the defensive line and in the secondary. They were missing their best guys. So why do we want to continue to try to use that as an excuse for why this defense gave up 370 yards to Justin Fields, Cody? We got the same amount of injuries as Dallas did this last week, and they gave up less than half the yardage we gave up, which is absolutely insane. Like, we need to stop insinuating that the injuries are the biggest problem as to why this team is playing bad. We're 25th in passing yards allowed this year, Cody, even with the fact that our defense is 31st in rushing yards allowed. So teams are running the ball consistently on the Indianapolis Colts, and yet still are finding enough time, Cody, to be able to throw for the 25th most yards of any team in the NFL against this defense. Just imagine if our run defense was good and we actually had to make it to where teams had to throw the football on us. I mean, our secondary might rank dead last. I mean, in all honesty, again, that's kind of a Gus Bradley situation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, it goes to show again, for Chris Ballard's sake, this unit was not ready. Again, it's a kind of the same issue we're seeing with the Anthony Richardson stuff, where like Anthony Richardson's not ready. That's why you're trying to get him the reps to try to get him to do these things. But you can't do that with an entire secondary. You can't do that with an entire secondary. You have to get players in there that are that are dogs that have to go in and actually be able to make plays. Like, this defensive scheme mixed with the lack of talent in this group and the lack of depth on this group, it's just a recipe for absolute disaster. And it's no wonder the Indianapolis Colts are struggling to start the year, because a trash defensive scheme and coordinator mixed with a terrible use of assets and trying to put a team together in the secondary has just combined for this absolute crap show of a defense this year. And I hate to say that when it comes to some of these guys, because I appreciate that everybody's out there doing their job as best as they can. But, I mean, this was on Chris Ballard. How many times have we kept saying all offseason that things needed to change and things needed to be added to this roster in case stuff like this happened? Well, guess what? It is still happening, and we're not making any changes, and we didn't make any changes, and now we're stuck with who we have, and we're going to now be stuck with a bottom-tier defense once again because of it.
Yeah, and I look at other positions, Derek, like where there is, I think, a good balance of veteran leadership and also a good balance of young guys in there. And it just feels like, especially for corner, like on the outside, it's just all youth. Like, it's all it is. You have 3 guys, Derek, who are starting right now that I think this is like their first or second full years as actual starters. Like, you think about it, this is truly Jalen Jones's first year as a starter. This will probably be Samuel Womack's first season as a starter full-time. Nick Cross's, if you want to count last year, not even as one, his first full-time. So you have 3 guys that are critical parts of your secondary right there, Derek, right off the top, that are really essentially, this is their first year as being a quote-unquote full-time starter, which is just crazy to me. Like, you just had no depth in there when it comes to, veteran guys. I mean, Derek, we use the example of Rodney McLeod. I mean, we look at Rodney McLeod, that 1 year Nick Cross, I think it was 2022, Nick Cross's first season, right? You look at it, like Nick Cross wasn't ready yet. He wasn't ready. And so Rodney McLeod was able to step in and allow Nick Cross to just sit back and watch, right? And I truly believe, Derek, like that was a pivotal point for Nick Cross in his development. And now he is ready. He is a lot more ready than he was his rookie season, right? So that's kind of how I view it. And I just think sometimes when you look at these corners, like you have to have a backup plan, and the Colts just seem like they didn't. Like then they do in a lot of other ways, which is just bizarre that they just completely ignored the secondary, especially corner, when you knew, like you said, there's already going to be an attrition at corner. You always need quality depth at corner. But even then, you have two guys that had, significant injuries last year that you just, honestly, it felt like you just kind of swept it under the rug and said they'll be fine. And I just don't think that's good GMing. I just don't think that's, looking 5 steps ahead and saying, yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen. We like our guys. But if it does, we have another guy that can step in and play quality ball for us, and we're not in a situation where the Colts currently find themselves in with very little depth. And if it wasn't for Samuel Womack, Derek, can you imagine if they didn't look into Samuel Womack, how even worse this defense would be? I mean, it would be like god awful. Like it's already god awful. It would be like next level.
It would be
awful.
DEFCON 1. Like, I mean, this would be red alert, like press the alarm. Like this would be like the worst case scenario that we've ever seen.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know, Derek, like, I don't know if the solution at this point is to add a veteran corner, because I'm like, at this point, it's like, oh, we're trying to stop the bleeding when we've already bled out. Like that's kind of how I feel about it. It's like, well, at this point, just roll with the young guys, and you kind of have to, if you're Chris Ballard, you kind of got to line the bed that you made for yourself here. That's kind of how I feel about it. And who knows? Maybe you look at it and you say, yeah, it sucked in year one. This is the optimism in me, Derek. I always have to bring it back to some sort of optimism. When you look back this year, you say that was stupid, but we got some quality young players. That's my only thing I look at and say, if I can put a positive spin on it, I'm like, hey, you get Jalen Jones. If he continues to develop, he's only like 22, 23. Samuel Womack continues to play well. You feel a little better about corner depth. And Nick Cross continues to play well and make plays as well. So that's kind of how I feel about it, Derek, when it comes to it. But as it stands right now, looking at it, it just definitely seemed like a very foolish decision by Chris Ballard and company to just kind of leave it be. Well, guys, with football season finally getting back into the swing of things, first off, we rejoice. But also, guys, when it comes to Prize Picks, this is going to be a great way for you guys, especially, to check out some of the stuff that Prize Picks has. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You heard me right. Only 4 correct picks. You can win 100 times your money, guys, on Prize Picks. Be sure to sign up today and get $50 off instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So, for example, if you think that Michael Pittman Jr. is going to have, over 80 yards this next week, or do you think Jonathan Taylor is going to have another performance of 80-plus yards rushing, you might be sitting pretty good with where you feel like the Colts are right now. Like, for example, I know one of the bets last week, Jonathan Taylor against the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Pittsburgh came in with a really good run defense, and so the over-under was 74.5 rushing yards. And obviously, Jonathan Taylor, if you would have taken the over there, you would have won in that department. And the odds weren't the greatest for Jonathan Taylor because, like I mentioned, that Pittsburgh defense. But to his credit, Jonathan Taylor definitely is a player you can never discount, and definitely a player you definitely want to always essentially take the over on, because he's just that good of a football player for the Indianapolis Colts. And so you can do all that on Prize Picks today. Or, for example, with Michael Pittman Jr., when you're talking about him, I mean, he hasn't done a whole lot to start the season for the Indianapolis Colts. But the thing that he did do well when it came, to week number 4 was, he had his first 100-yard game. And if you would have bet that Michael Pittman Jr. potentially did his over, which really wasn't a whole lot in this performance. I mean, really, when you look at it, his over-under was
45.5 receiving yards. And obviously you smashed the over there. He had 113. So those are just a couple examples of what you can do on Prize Picks today. So if you're looking specifically for the Colts stuff, that's definitely something you guys should check out. But if you're looking for, like me, more NFL stuff, there's all sorts of stats and stuff that you can check out and make your picks. And there's definitely guys that are very consistent, like Jonathan Taylor against the Houston Texans, that you really feel like you can probably feel pretty good about overall, right? And there's some other ones where you're like, I don't know if I would take the over on that. I don't know if I would pick them to hit that margin, right? So, guys, be sure to go check out all that stuff on Prize Picks. It's only a couple examples. There's all the different odds that you could hope for when it comes to that for Prize Picks. So I encourage you guys to go check that out, but definitely excited for this season. And hopefully you guys will be following along with us and everything with Prize Picks and what they do. So be sure to download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Like I said, guys, it's a great way to continue to stay in with week to week life of the NFL, specifically with your favorite team, the Indianapolis Colts. So be sure to do that. Be sure to check out Prize Picks. And remember, Prize Picks, run your game.
Yep, it's one of those situations. It's beyond fixing at this point. And you know what the crap part is, Cody, about this is the same excuse that a lot of people are using for why this secondary is so bad and why defense is so bad, the injuries. That is what this staff and this organization is going to be saying about this team at the end of the year. Yep. And why they're not going to fix it anymore.
And
they're going to say it's the injuries, it's the injuries, it's the injuries. If
that's
our
the biggest
wasn't
problem,
so injury ridden, we would have probably seen them do better.
It's like this is an organization of excuses right now under Chris Ballard. That's what it is, Derek. Like, it's just excuse after excuse. Oh, well, if this happened, I don't care if that would have happened. Look what did happen. That's what the issue is like, at the end of the day, you can say injuries all you want. You can use that excuse till you're blue in the face, Derek. But if your secondary still sucks, and this is year 8 of you being a GM, maybe you need to change something, man. Maybe you need to look in the mirror and do some self-reflection, because same crap, different year. That's kind of how I look at it. Same crap, different position. That's how it always is with them. It's like it's always an excuse. It's always the next thing. And I'm just fed up with it, man. I'm just fed up with always trying to rationalize or point to the what is. Derek, that's what losers do. That's what losers do. Chris Ballard is a loser. I'm going to say it. We don't criticize Chris Ballard enough on this show. Chris Ballard, if he does that, that's a loser mentality. That is, straight up. We got to call it what it is.
Absolutely.
That's what it is.
It is a loser mentality. It's once again, knowing that there could have been some different things could have been different. There could have been some moves that were made that could have made this team in a better situation. That it might have cost the continuity of the group a little bit, but in the case of the fact that now there is no continuity with the group because everybody's injured or everybody's been released, like, you've ruined your whole argument on that at this point. You should have just went with what the fans were telling you. Sign a veteran or two and figure it out. Either they start or they don't start. If they were better than the corners that you drafted, that you hope is the future of your organization, then so what? That's the whole point, is wait for them to get better. That's the whole point. It's why it doesn't have to be, oh, we're going to ride or die by the young guys that we drafted. It's a gamble that oftentimes just doesn't work at every position, especially when you yourself have not been very good at drafting that said position. Honestly, Cody, like, what cornerback do we have right now that Chris Ballard has drafted where you say, oh yeah, that guy was a real good player. Isaiah Rodgers, maybe? That might be the
Right.
only corner I think he's ever drafted where it's like,
A 6th-round
oh, he was
pick.
actually a pretty good player.
Yeah.
That's
That's
it.
wild.
Like, so he's drafted a lot of corners. I'm sure he's drafted maybe at least half a dozen corners since he's been here in Indianapolis. I got to imagine more than that. How many of them are on the roster right now? Yeah, he's been with the team for about 8 years now. But, I mean, if you had some good players on your team, you'd see guys that were still on your team quite a few years later. We don't. There's no good track record of that. So again, I wouldn't trust Ballard's track record on corners to have good continuity or to grow as a group because we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen it. It's been 8 years. I ain't seen one except Isaiah Rodgers. We got lucky with that one.
Isn't it weird that like the corners that the Colts have heavily invested in that have actually been good have all been outside free agents? Like, think about that. Like, Stephon Gilmore was a great cornerback for the Indianapolis Colts. Xavier Rhodes was a good cornerback for a couple of years for the Colts, right? All the Colts corners that have played good football for them for the majority and have been like actual legitimate, like top 15 corners have all been free agents. All of them. I mean, I really do think that. Isaiah Rodgers might be the exception to that. But every single one, all the way back from Quincy Wilson to Juju Brents, it just hasn't worked. It hasn't worked multiple times. And so we talk about how Ballard, I think if you talk about how he's been terrible at drafting pass rushers, he's been probably just as bad in certain ways at drafting corners. It's been the same thing, man. And so so it's like, if you know you have a weakness, why do you keep going back to that? It's like you just have that big of an ego where you just can't admit that you're not great at drafting everything. Like, that's kind of where I think that's what separates Ballard from any other good GM in the NFL. Is like, good GMs realize their shortcomings. I don't think Chris Ballard thinks he has any, Derek. I really don't think he does. And that's the problem, is you need to just admit that you're not good at things sometimes. Like, you just need to admit that, and you need to make the moves. You can't just sit back and let your ego get so big and allow it to hurt the football team. Chris Ballard acts like he doesn't have a care in the world about winning. That's how it looks when he addresses the cornerback room the way he does, or fails to address it, I should say. And that's what's the most infuriating thing, is like, do you care about winning? Like, do you actually care about like getting legitimate players out there? Do you care about adding depth and responding when trouble does happen? Because it will. It just doesn't seem like so there's always that one position where it's just like, it doesn't seem like he cares enough. It doesn't seem like he does enough. And that, to me, that's worrisome, Derek. That's worrisome. Like, that bothers me a lot. I don't know how you feel about it, but I just don't like that feeling. I just don't like it at all.
Yeah, it bothers me just how it does bother me just how a lot of times it feels like he just wants to prove a point on how well he drafts rather than it reminds me of Dabo Sweeney in college for Clemson. You know, like, Dabo Sweeney for the longest time refused to use the transfer portal because he's like, it's a disgrace to the game. We're gonna recruit our guys. We're gonna make it to where we get done. And Clemson got left behind. While the other elite programs were bringing in elite talent, Clemson got left behind. And they're still quite a bit behind to some of the elite teams because, you know, they refused to try to bring in that elite talent when it was available. It might not have been in a way that you normally would like to do it, or in a way that you like to do it, but that stuff is there, and you have the money to do it. So go freaking do it. Like, seriously. Like, you're not impressing anybody by having no balls going out and not signing anybody. All you're doing is making everybody laugh at you because everyone else knows the stupidity of of the decision you're making. Like, you're the only one that seems to think you're not an idiot for not going out and trying to get people and paying just a little bit more than what you wanted just to be able to bring somebody in. Like that's the whole premise here.
Yeah, it just seems like you said, it's just like the ego is more than team success, which that's not a leader, Derek. That's not who you want, calling the shot for your football team. And that's what's just so puzzling. It's just like, really, does it matter that much? Is it really that big of a deal? And the thing is, like, it's not like he hasn't ever done this. Like, we've seen him go out and sign veteran players. So it's just odd that he just outright refused to do it at the most obvious position. If there was one position, Derek, like, it was so obvious to everyone that it was going to be an issue. Like, it was so obvious. Yeah, we liked some of the young players, but Derek, I mean, they were not proven, and there was a lot of question marks, and we knew that. So I just don't know. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of thought put into that. It just kind of seemed like, I'm going to prove everybody wrong, like I did last year with offensive line, for example. Like, we were clamoring again, that worked out. Okay, like, we'll admit that was a good one, but it just seems like he tries to do that every year, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it's Matt Pryor at left tackle. I mean, truly, that's what it is. And that it seems like it happens about every year at a position. And it's a position, Derek, that costs the team games every single year. And here we are again, sitting here in year 8 of Chris Ballard's tenure, complaining about the same stuff because the GM, his ego's too big. That's what it is.
And I just want to say to end this, okay, so let's just get this understanding here. Okay, so the last 3 quarterbacks that we faced, right? Justin Fields, and we had Caleb Williams, and we had Trevor Lawrence. So after tonight, with Patrick Mahomes finally playing, you will have faced a quarterback in Justin Fields who has had 961 yards passing this year, Cody. Get this. A third of his passing yards this year have come against Indy. Think about that for a second. Caleb Williams, who had 365 against Indy, get this, a third of his passing yards against us for the entirety of the season. He has 1,091. Trevor Lawrence. And also, by the way, Caleb Williams and Justin Fields are both in the bottom 10 in passing yardage. Okay? Just to give you an idea of that. And then Trevor Lawrence at 1,100 yards. Again, almost a third of his yards for his entire season came against Indy. Again, secondary is not the only reason for that. This defensive line has not been good this year. It's been battered with injuries. But that's pathetic, man. You have 3 quarterbacks that are at the bottom of the NFL in passing yards this year. And that's the story you have. Like that's where we're at right now. So it's bad. It's bad, and something's gonna have to be a complete overhaul, because this secondary is just an absolute disgrace.
And it's tough because there are players in here that you're like, okay, like, there's building blocks off of this, but it's just not enough. It's just clearly not enough. The scheme's clearly the worst part. Like, I think we can say that. The scheme, the coaching, that's where it starts and ends for me. But, you also can't, absolve Chris Ballard of blame. Like, he deserves a lot of the blame as well. Like, so Gus Bradley, Chris Ballard, and obviously the players as well, they all deserve fault in this. So I don't know, Derek. Like you said, I think there's got to be a big overhaul in some key areas, whether that's, coaching staff, personnel, GM, whatever it is. Like, you need a little bit of everything there. And I don't know what it's going to take, because you're in a weird position right now where you still have, this young quarterback. You're not necessarily expected to be a contender, but Derek, it's a problem when you score 34 points and you don't win the game. Like, that's an issue. That is a big issue. So I don't know, man. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't really know how much you can truly do right now when it comes to this secondary. You may just have to ride it out, look for a new defensive coordinator next year, and kind of just start over, really, with this group in general. So it's going to be kind of a wild ride, man. But we're going to kind of see it out. Hopefully they can get it figured out. Hopefully now with Dallas Flowers out of the way, it'll open up a spot for a guy like Samuel Womack potentially to slide right into cornerback too. And maybe you get a little bit more stability from the group. I'm not entirely sure. But Derek, I will say this. If you have one more injury, you're absolutely screwed. Like, you are absolutely screwed. There's no margin for error right now with this group. That's the biggest problem. Is like with the attrition of the NFL, you just left yourself zero margin for error, zero margin for injuries. And unfortunately, two of your three top corners, one's out for the year and one's been injured. That's kind of where you sit right now. But guys, let us know your thoughts overall here when it comes to this cornerback room, Chris Ballard's inability and his ego and how he's dug his own grave with this group. Let us know all those things in the comments down below. Who do you primarily blame for this lack of any sort of quality football from this cornerback and secondary in general? Are you more on Chris Ballard? Are you more on Gus Bradley? Are you somewhere in the middle? Where do you throw the players into this? All these things. Let us know all of them in the comments down below. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.